Hey everybody, I'm Anna McEwen. And now for Bob Switzer with the epic narrative.
Okay. I know the last one was shorter than usual, I guess by about 5 or 6 minutes, which, that's all right. You guys don't mind. And that's why I was like halfway debating, because I'm looking at the time going, well, if you went like another 35 minutes, you probably could, combine it all, because it just flows so naturally one chapter into the next. So I hope you don't mind that you had to wait to hear the next episode, because this is a big, I titled The Big Reveal. How could you not title this chapter The Big Reveal? This is like one of the world-renowned revealings of all time. It's big. This is big. Joseph had gotten everybody together. They had their lunch. They had their good night's sleep. They had everything packed up, ready to go home. They had Benjamin with them. Then the cup was found and Benjamin was in trouble, and all the brothers agreed, we're all going back. We're all going back because there's no way that we can exist in a world where Benjamin is not home. Because if he's not home, Dad's not going to live. And we are not going to do this without Benjamin. So they all they all went back with him. And in their passion to make sure things are right, to make sure that their dad survives, they were like, well, we'll all be slaves. Like, this is who we are. We did this once before. We got rid of one of our brothers. We didn't back up our brother. We literally shoved our brother out of the family and refused to let him ever come home. And we have been paying for this emotionally ever since. The drama, the trauma, the emptiness, the disappointment, like the rejection, everything. These guys have dealt with everything. And why? Because not because God's dumping on them. Remember, all the stuff that they're dealing with comes from the enemy, because the enemy says, hey, I'm not happy until you're dead. I talk to people, they're like, you think Satan would leave me alone? You think the devil would leave me alone? I'm like, he's not going to leave you alone till you're dead. He literally is not happy till you're dead. It's not like he's going to look at you and just go, well, they're having a really bad day. I probably should back off a little bit. Let them recover from my, what I've done to them. No, good golly, Miss Molly. That is not how the devil operates. It's just not how he operates. He's going to come after you and come after you and come after you and come after you. And he's going to keep piling on. That's what he's been doing to all these brothers. They are in that state. Then Judah steps up, because he had the trust of the father and the empathy necessary to speak authentically. Of course, he didn't know he was speaking to Joseph, but he spoke with such passion that Joseph could see him. He could see his heart, and he was like, wow. All right. And that's where we pick up chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants. Now, he already wept. Has he wept twice now? Let's see. I know he wept at just before lunch. He wept one other time. He left the room and came back. So he's, he's been on the edge for a while whenever the brothers are around, because again, he had maintained his vow. And now he's realizing they've maintained theirs as well. They took care of Benjamin. They took care of his father. But clearly, he wants to let them know. He could have just let it go. Honestly, we've got to look at the flip side of this a little bit. He could have given them their grain and let them go back to Canaan the first time and not said a word, not interviewed them, not grilled them, nothing. But he didn't. He could have let them in. He could have grilled them about being spies, and then he could have let them go and not kept one of them behind and just figured, well, eventually, I mean, I know how long this famine's going to last. Eventually they're going to come back, and maybe I'll do something else. He could have accused them of being spies and sent guards with them all the way back to Canaan, and instructed the guards, when you get there, be sure to, examine the patriarch. He probably wouldn't have said my father, but and confirm whether or not they have a younger brother, and if they do, pack them all up and bring them back. He is in charge of Egypt. Egypt is well on their way to becoming a world power at this point because they have food. He had the resources to connect and be a part of be a part of his family again if he wanted to. There was more than one way to go after this. So why did he go this way? I don't know. But I'm fairly confident, as I've stated in previous episodes, this was not God's plan. This was Joseph's plan. And I think he was in a lot of ways kind of winging it. So he's finally ready, and he knows he's going to lose his emotional being. So he says to everybody, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. So he sends out all his attendants. Now remember, this is at his house. I have no idea how many attendants are around. I'm guessing it's at least a couple dozen. And he says, I want everybody out. I want everybody out. I want everybody out. Everybody leaves immediately. And the brothers, like, what are your thoughts at this point, right? You've just begged for your innocence. And they didn't beg for their lives. They begged for their innocence, but they were willing to pay the price because deep inside they have felt guilty for 20 plus years. They just know, listen, we may be innocent of this, but we are not innocent. So whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and we're going to be fine with it. We're just going to deal with it because we are tired, exhausted from the emotional baggage we have had to carry around, the burdens we've carried around. Again, not because God wanted this to happen, but because the enemy will not let you up when you're down. So there was no one with Joseph. Verse 2, he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. So this is what's going on. This is kind of a blanket statement that kind of covers several verses because of what we find out later in the verses. But basically, he reveals himself and it just explodes. Like, it just explodes. There are tears. There is weeping. There is hyperventilating. There's snot running down your nose. Like, this is a big, fat, emotional, mental intensity of all kinds. Just the truth is being released. Years of suppression is, basically being like a volcano exploding out of the heart of Joseph. Now that he knows that his younger brother is alive and his father is alive, and it's just time. The time is now, as far as he's concerned. Now, honestly, he could have done this a couple years ago. There's nothing that says he could have. He could have had them followed to Canaan, and he could have said, he could have gotten them a report back. Hey, they're in the same spot that you had said that they would be. Nobody's, evidently that's where they all live still. And he could have showed up. He could have had a chariot and 1,200 guards with him. And he could have just showed up and said, hey, guess who? Knock, knock. Guess who? But no, he waited till now. I don't know why. But Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Now, it's a weird question, right? Because he knows he's still living. He's already asked this. He asked this several times. His brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Imagine that. Okay, now here is the viceroy of the most powerful and soon to most powerful country most powerful country that you know of, and possibly, or at least soon to be, most powerful country in the world. He's weeping. He's uncontrollable. He has all of this clear, like intense emotions. And then he says, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Think this through just a little bit, right? You've got the joy internally of Joseph being able to finally let out this truth that he's been suppressing for years. And you've got the brothers who are terrified because the truth of what they think has happened is now coming out. You've got joy from just that release of being reunited with your brothers, and the joy of the brothers who are thinking, wow, we thought you were dead and now you're alive. But then you got total confusion, complete confusion over the details. Like what just happened? Wait, how did this happen? Wait, like when we left you, we sold you into slavery. How did you become second in command, second only to Pharaoh? Wait, are you serious? Now remember, he doesn't look like Joseph. His hair is shaved. He's wearing the headdress of a viceroy. He's wearing the necklace and the robes of an Egyptian royalty. He's got the sandals on his feet. He's probably clean shaven all the way across his body. That was one of the ways that they identified royalty, was the attention to that kind of detail regarding their bodily care. They were soaked regularly in oils, and they were rubbed down with other oils and creams. Like there was nothing about him that looked Hebrew or sounded Hebrew. And yet he's like, I'm Joseph. Is dad still alive? This is crazy time. So yeah, confusion makes total sense. And of course, absolute curiosity over the details. Wait, where, when did you know? How did we not recognize? How did we not know? Oh man. Yeah, they were terrified. Of course, they had tremendous fear, because if what this guy just said is true, Joseph is alive. Guess what? He's also Viceroy of Egypt. Like, if you thought you were going to die last time you were in his presence just because you thought he was in charge of everything and could possibly lose his mind and kill you or enslave you, now you know he has reason to lose his mind and kill you or enslave you, because he's the brother who you pulled up out of a well and sold off into slavery. Judah's got to be thinking, oh my God. And then, of course, you've got absolute hope, streaming through your brain, because you realize, well, he hasn't killed us the last, times we were down here. And like now we realize, the silver in our bags the last time was given to us so that we would recognize the blessings of God, and we would start to question ourselves and say, why are we being blessed when everybody else had to pay for grain? Why didn't we? Why didn't we make that connection? And maybe now they start to have a little bit of hope because Joseph is alive and he's in charge of Egypt. So the very thing that was also bringing them fear was also bringing them hope. And then, of course, I'm sure they were stressed a little bit because they realized somewhere in there, somebody realized, oh my God, he understood us when we were talking Hebrew. He knows what we said. He knows what we said. He knows that we know that he knows now that he knows, oh my God. That whole dinner, all the things that we said, he heard us. So yeah, they were terrified, and terrified just means it doesn't mean that they were cowering in fear only. It just means they had so many intense emotions. They were worried. They were dismayed. They were hopeful and curious and confused and had some relief, and that they hadn't killed their brother, in confusion over what happened after they sold him and how he ended up here. They had curiosity over all kinds of details that they would love to get information on. There was all kinds of stuff going on. So yeah, terrified is a great word for this. And Joseph pulls himself together enough, and he calls them to come close, because they probably were kind of huddled together on the other side of the room, just staring at this weeping mess of an emotional man on the other side. And they're thinking, there's nowhere to go. There is no servants around for us to ask any questions. There is nowhere for us to go. We are, the palace guards would have been all around his house, and he is crying out so loud, there's no way no one else hears him. And they're thinking, they're going to think that we're trying to kill him. So Joseph gathers himself together. He calls him close, and he speaks to them, and he speaks to them in Hebrew. That's what the oral tradition says here. He calls his brothers to him, and when he had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Now don't be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save the lives. It was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. So here's a clue as to how long these guys had waited to go get grain. They should have had enough grain, right? They waited the whole year. They should have left early, but they waited a whole year. Now, the first year of famine, like I said, you generally have enough supplies to get through, but the second year of famine, you don't. So these guys, the famine had been around for 2 years. And he goes, there's 5 more years coming. There's going to be no plowing, no reaping. There's no rain coming. This is going to be a tough run, but that's okay, because I'm in charge and I have a plan, and God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth and save your lives. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh and lord over his entire household and ruler over all of Egypt. Now, let's go through this, because this passage is a big one when it comes to God orchestrating bad things for good people to go through. And so I want to spend some time. I just want to spend some time here, because this is important. All right, so he says to them that in the Hebrew here, what he's saying is God's goodness overrode or overrides or overrules the evil that you planned. When he says this, he is not saying that the evil was God's plan. He said, you planned for evil. God's plan is good. God's plan always overrules your plan when you plan evil. That's what he's saying. He is not saying it was God's plan for evil to occur. He's saying God's goodness overrides evil's plans. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Joseph could look past it all, because he could look through his life and he saw the goodness of God. He understood the favor of God all through his time at Potiphar's house. He saw the goodness of God, even in prison, being falsely accused. He saw the goodness of God even when he did ask to be released and people had forgotten about him. He saw the goodness of God when he pleaded that the cupbearer plead his case before Pharaoh. He saw the goodness of God when he was taken out of prison and put in front of Pharaoh to interpret a dream. Who did he give credit for? He gave credit to God. He didn't try to say, well, I can interpret this dream, but first you got to let me out of prison. You got to, something's got to be in this for me. Joseph had gotten to a place in the presence of God, under the direction and training of his father, I assume, was that he understood and recognized that God's hand could overrule evil plans all the time. So he is not telling his brothers, listen, God planned this all the evil was part of God's plan. He's saying, you planned it for evil, God's plan overrides it. So don't beat yourselves up. I think part of that is he recognizes through Judah's plea and through the response that he heard them say in Hebrew the time before, he recognizes that these guys have been beat up for years in stuff that the enemy just piled on, the guilt, the shame, the rejection, the disappointment, the everything bad always happens to me. Remember that principle of you reap what you sow. That is a creation type of principle. That is a kingdom principle, and it's designed for blessing. But if you're walking around saying only bad things happen to me, guess what? You will constantly attract from creation bad things happening to you. You will see bad things happening to you everywhere you look. But if you adopt the truth, which is God is good all the time, then all you start to see is the goodness of God. And people, listen, I've been in circumstances, I've literally been through things in my life where I need to be careful. Bad things happen to me. Bad things. And lots of people were like, that was not justified. The way you were treated was not justified. You know, and I agree with them. But I wasn't offended. I wasn't gonna let the circumstances dictate my response. I went to God. I was like, when this bad thing was happening to me, and it was a spoken word, right? And it took about 2 hours for them to tell me how terrible I was and why I needed to leave. And in the whole time, the voice I kept hearing in my heart was, do you think I'm a good shepherd? Do you trust me to walk you through this? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I stuck with Jesus the whole time. I can't tell you the number of people during that time and since that time that have said to me, what happened to you was wrong, Bob. What happened to you was wrong, but I don't know how you did it. And this is how I did it. I did it the same way Joseph's doing it here. He's like, listen, I know it was wrong. I know you brothers, you meant it for evil. Like what happened to me personally, Bob, what happened to Bob was not evil. It was just wrong. What happened to Joseph was meant for evil. They wanted him to die. They threw him in a dry well where they could leave him for 3 days. 4 days later, he probably would never survive. They were just going to kind of, quote, let God decide what happens to him. And then they sell him into slavery. They meant that for evil. They wanted to separate him, and they made this covenant. They meant that for evil. And what happened to him was evil, not just unjust, not just unfair, not just unkind. This was evil intent. Yet Joseph's confidence was God is good all through time. And this goes all the way back to our beginning. This goes all the way back to episode 1. Out of the beginning, goodness came. Out of the beginning, light came, hope came, joy came. In that is where Joseph found his connection. He didn't find his connection back to any bad thing. He found it back at creation. He's like, this is where I belong. All this circumstantial crud that's going on around me is irrelevant because I know where I connect to. I connect back to the beginning, and that's where he stayed. So when he was struggling, he didn't have to struggle long. He didn't have to struggle far. He immediately, okay, maybe it took him a few minutes periodically, but he would go back to God and reconnect back to the beginning. So here we see that we're verse 2. There you go, verse 2. It says Pharaoh's household heard about it. This conversation, these verses, right? Again, they happen so fast. We read them so fast that we think, oh my gosh, this is like a 3-minute event. No, this probably went on for several hours because Joseph did answer questions and he did fill in the details, and they filled him in on details, and they apologized. You don't think they apologized and begged for forgiveness, and he released forgiveness. And there was so much release. I'm guessing they all cried at some point or another, and they all hugged each other, and they all apologized to one another because they had offended one another and held offense against one another and blamed one another for the negative emotions that they were feeling. I'm telling you, this was a family that had been destroyed by the enemy. The enemy couldn't destroy them fast enough. And Joseph is seeing all the goodness of God come in and override all the evil plans of the enemy. And then during all of this, he also says, now hurry back. I want you to go back to my father. I want you to say to him that this is your son, Joseph. And Joseph says, God has made me Lord over all of Egypt. Come down and don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine is still to come. Otherwise, you and your households will all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourself, so can my brother Benjamin, that this is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. And then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin, and they wept, and Benjamin embraced him, and they were weeping, and he kissed all of his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. So that's what I'm saying. This meeting went for hours. There was a whole lot of healing, forgiveness, joy, kissing, reuniting. There was apologies given and forgiveness released and unity, and the family was coming back together. And Joseph said, go get my dad. Go get my dad. Tell him all the stuff that you've seen and report to him the fact that I really am in charge of Egypt, that I'm honored throughout the land, that I am protected, that I have resources, and let him know there's 5 more years of famine coming. And in those 5 years, if you don't come down here, you will be destitute. Trust me, there is no planting, there is no reaping. You will become destitute. And part of that was the plan of Joseph to bring destitution and to the world and wealth to Egypt. And we'll get into that, I think, in 2 more episodes. Then it says in verse 16, the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come. Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Now, I don't know who released this information. I don't know when this information was released. But what I do know is that it got there. Now, I don't know who was paying attention, not paying attention. I don't know if it was rumors. I don't know if it went through the servant quarters, if an official courier went out. But it sounds as though it was not an official informational thing. Now, the fact that Joseph was weeping and it was so loud that everyone in the household could hear it. This sort of information, this was a ruler of the country, and he was in great distress, and he was surrounded by Hebrews. That sort of thing would have like a fast ripple effect throughout the government. People that are begging for Joseph's jobs, people who are desperate to kick him out of the council, people that would like to have that kind of power and authority. Pharaoh heard about options that would be better than Joseph's options many times, especially during the time of plenty. He probably heard other interpretations, other prophecies that people came up and said, this year of plenty, like this is going to continue for years to come, Pharaoh, for you are great and beyond comprehension. And Pharaoh would have to wonder, is this something that is true? And then he would trust Joseph. So when Joseph is weeping, information got out fast. And I think it went through back channels. So Pharaoh gets the information, and then he finds out what's going on. He finds out that Joseph's brothers had come, verse 16, and Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased because they realized, all right, He's actually not distressed. He's overjoyed. We just don't know because, no one was in the room when all of this happened. So Pharaoh decides, I'm going to bless their socks off. Now, there's probably political reason for this, right? If Joseph brings me this much favor from the gods, imagine what 11 other of these guys would do. This is going to be fabulous news for Egypt. And for me, I'm going to be elevated beyond the stars at this point, is what I'm guessing he's thinking at some level. He's also probably thinking, Joseph will never leave if I move his family into my country. He'll never leave. He will be so much more loyal to me if his brothers are down here and his father's down here. There is no way that this turns bad for me. This is all going to be good. And we're going to take a very prominent family of the Hebrew culture, and we're going to bring them down here and make them loyal to us. Now, I know that there's ethnic and racial issues going on here. Egyptians do not like the Hebrews. So if there's ways that you can bridge that gap, this is a wealthy family with high influential trade routes and merchant connections throughout the land of Canaan. And Canaanites had a tremendous what do I want to say? Seashore, waterfront. Nope. Come on, Bob. Trades. Thank you. They had all kinds of trade routes and harbors, as well as the fish. They also had produce, things that Egypt didn't have. We covered that in a previous episode. Things like almonds and honey and pistachios. This was all good as far as Pharaoh was concerned. So he sends a message. Tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best land of Egypt and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this, take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives and your father and come. Never mind about your belongings. We will provide everything you need. All the best of Egypt will be yours. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provision for their journey. Pharaoh has this grand plan. This is going to come together perfectly. It probably takes 3 or 4 days to pull all of this together. They get word back from the Pharaoh. It's not like he lived down the street. They get word from the Pharaoh, hey, I heard your brothers are in town. I want you to tell them that I want them to come back to Egypt. I want them to come to Egypt. I want them to get their families. I want them to live here. I want to provide for them the best of the land. I want to give them opportunity to grow and prosper here. I want you to bring your father back here. And whatever his motive was for it, that's what he said. And then it says, and Joseph did this. That means that he went and got carts and he got wagons and he got carriers and he got donkeys and he got camels and he got horses, anything they could need. And then he said, each of them, he gave new clothing. So they took off their Hebrew garb and they put on brand new robes and chains and belts and shoes, all made of the finest linens from around the world. They cleaned themselves up, oiled themselves up, shaved themselves up. They were looking really fine. To each of them, all of them got this, right? And he gave them carts, lots of carts. And then Benjamin, he got 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father, 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt. I have no idea what that stuff is, but I'm guessing it was gorgeous and very expensive. 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey, so that basically when they got there 3 weeks later, they wouldn't have to prepare 3 weeks of food to make the journey back to Egypt. So he was setting enough food for the brothers to get back home and enough food for all the families to get all the way back to Egypt. So this was going to be as quick of a turnaround as possible. And then he sent his brothers away. And as they were leaving, he said to them, do not quarrel on the way. Now, I want to pause there because this is important. That word quarrel is loaded. He says, don't judge yourselves. Don't judge each other. Don't incriminate each other. Take your time. Don't rush. You got plenty of provisions. You've got carts. You've got riches. You don't have to rush this. Take your time. Be blessed. Do not judge one another. Don't quarrel with one another. Don't heap guilt. We just got rid of all this guilt. We just forgave everybody. We just made all things right between us. Don't go to the patterns that you've had for the last 20 plus years and turn this back into something where you start assigning blame to the one who actually did it, to the ones who made the covenant, to the ones who were there when this happened or that happened, please don't. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's live a life that is filled with hope and filled with joy, filled with direction and purpose. Then in verse 25, so they went out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. That's 3 weeks. 3 weeks later. Now, as you're coming up to that area, like you have to tell yourself who's going to talk and how do we tell them? How do we tell Dad, hey, Joseph's alive? Thumbs up, baby. Aren't you excited? Dad, you'll never guess who we found. Hey, Dad, so we were talking to that big dude in Egypt, and it turns out he's related to us. Who would have guessed? Dad, there's a miracle. God has showed up. He raised Joseph from the dead. I don't know. I do not know. Oh man, the options that went through their head. Now I have conversations in my head. I have hundreds of conversations in my head that never take place because I'm constantly in conversation with potential conversations so that I'm prepared for every conversation. And I would have been talking to myself for that whole 3 weeks on how in the world do we tell Dad that Joseph is alive? And I would have been, if I wasn't chosen to do the conversating, I would have been talking to the one who was, because I would have had 1,000 ideas on how to present this. But they get there. And so verse 26 to me seems almost disappointing. They told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all of Egypt. Now, maybe they went with the blunt approach. I don't know. It just seems a little not like anticlimactic. Jacob was stunned. You think he might have been a little stunned? Jiminy crickets. He did not believe him. I wouldn't either. I sent my sons away. They all come back. I'm happy to see Benjamin is with them. Happy. But I'm also looking at the clothes these guys are wearing. And I'm thinking, what, you guys went to the market and decided to ditch everything that you owned and buy new clothes? And then I'm looking at their carts, and they got all new carts. And they got all this grain and more, and Benjamin's got 5 sets of clothing. And they've got way more grain than they need. They got bread, and they got horses that they didn't leave with. They got, like the dad must have seen these people coming and going to himself, what in the world happened? I know they didn't have the lottery back then, but like, did you do battle? Did you have a raiding party? What in the world? Where is all of this coming from? And they're like, hey, Joseph's alive and he rules all of Egypt and he gave us all this stuff. And he's like, no, don't lie to me. But, he's half of me thinks he was disappointed because they lied to him and they thought he would believe him. And half of me thinks he's upset because they lied to him and they wanted, I don't know which way to go on this. But it says when they told him everything that Joseph had said, which means they told him everything from the moment he revealed himself all the way through. So they recounted hours and hours and hours of conversation, as well as days of conversation that they would have had while they prepared to come home. It says when they told him everything, and when he saw his carts and all that Joseph had sent back, it says the spirit of the father Jacob was revived. And that's an important word. Now, there are some oral traditions that say the carts actually had certain things carved on them that were a reference to the last conversation that Joseph had with Jacob. And that's why it's mentioned when it says, and when he saw the carts. Now, in the oral traditions, they say that what was carved on these carts were calves, livestock that Joseph and Jacob had spoken about just prior to him leaving to go check on his brothers. And this was another evidence that was given to Jacob for him to see and to remember that last conversation, something only Joseph would have known because the brothers weren't there when they had that conversation. So that's kind of cool. Again, I can't say it's wrong, but it's kind of cool that was, if that's true. And I could see that being part of this whole thing about how they're coming together. So it says Jacob was revived. And that's why it mentions, again, he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back. And the spirit of the father was revived. So there was something about the carts, or something that was in the carts, or something that was said, that Jacob was like, wow, it really is Joseph. And when it says revived, it means both physically and spiritually, emotionally. Remember the years of depression, the years of victimization, the years of selfishness, the years of stern discipline and pride of protection over Benjamin, and blaming everybody for killing Joseph. Like, all of this was gone. He went through this whole almost salvation moment where physically, spiritually, and emotionally he was brought back together, and joy filled him with strength. And it says that he stood taller, he stood strong, he stood without help. He was strong again. It basically took 20 years off his life. It was a huge family party at that point. And then they all began to prep for a big move south. Now, again, they didn't necessarily need to put together a lot of food. All the food had already been sent. They had a party there. They had a ton of bread that had been sent from Egypt. The kids were all shown, hey, you're going to ride in this cart. The wives were all shown, you're going to ride in this cart. These are our new donkeys and our new camels, and we can load things up. And we don't need to bring our clothes. They're giving us all new clothes. No, we don't need to bring the tents. They're giving us all new places to live. No, we don't have to bring new shoes. Just, wear whatever you want to wear, but we're going to get all new shoes. Like, everything, the best of Egypt is ours. Our brother Joseph is second only to Pharaoh in the whole nation. I'm telling you, I've seen his house. I've seen the food. I've seen the servants. I've seen the guards. I've seen the provision. Honey, you don't need to bring anything. Now, that usually doesn't work really well when you tell your wife she doesn't need to pack things, but maybe it worked. But I'm guessing even if it didn't work, it didn't matter. There was enough there for them to load everything in and to head back to Egypt. And we are going to head out and wait for the next episode of the Epic Narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for hanging out today. I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did.
Don't go anywhere. We've got Bob Thoughts.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am sitting here in my truck coming to you today from the cab. It's an awesome truck. Hauls the house anywhere I want to go. It's pretty spectacular. Anyways, picking up some propane because need to stay warm, even in Texas. Today's episode, I listened to it and I thought it's still amazing to me, or at least entertaining to me, to consider all the thoughts that the brothers were having and interacting with when the reveal happened and what to do with it. They'd spent over 20 years in some form of guilt, shame, embarrassment, hiding, burying what they did, pretending it never happened, or somehow coping, right? Whatever their coping mechanism was. And it's probably different for each one of the brothers. And then to have all of that exploded in front of them, and the savior of the family is also Joseph, right? So they're clearly super happy about this and also terrified, and like there's just so many emotions going on, and I totally understand all that. And the grace of Joseph. Now, like I still don't think Joseph's plan came from God. I think it was his plan. I think he was winging it. But he clearly, I think, stayed connected to heaven in that he showed love and he showed grace in telling them, listen, don't argue on the way home. Don't go after each other, because they were going to, because they wanted to blame somebody, blame Reuben, blame Judah, blame, whatever. They needed a place to put all those years of guilt and shame and embarrassment and coping and having to be silent. And of course, then the conversation of how do you tell dad? Do you tell dad? Like, do you just pretend that you all thought he was dead and had no idea what happened to him? And oh, look, here he is. Who knew? I'm sure it was discussed. It had to be discussed. And that's why I like the idea of the legend that he sent carts and made it clear somehow the carts carried the message from Joseph to his father. Because, I know it's Jacob. I know he's the father of the faith. I know all that. I'm not taking that away from him. But in a lot of ways, he reminds me of the character, the Steward of Gondor from Lord of the Rings. I forget the guy's name at this point, but he had two sons, and one of them was clearly the favored son, and the second son desperately wanted his father's love and tried to earn it every which way he could through sacrifice, through obedience. And it didn't matter what he did, he was never going to be his older brother, the favored brother. And even though the favored brother understood that, what his dad was doing and tried to show love to his little brother, it was never enough because the father always favored the older brother. And there was nothing the older brother could do about it. In some ways, I feel like Joseph understood that as well. And when he told his brothers not to argue, he's like, I know what dad's going to do. Like, please don't blame each other. And I wonder what Jacob did. There's not a lot recorded, but I know that there had to be moments in preparing to go back to Egypt, in hearing what had happened and preparing to go, that he was like, look at that. Joseph, basically raises from the dead and saves this family. None of you could save the family. None of you could come up with a way to survive during the famine. But Joseph, he saved the family and he's saving the world. But God, is with Joseph. God favors Joseph. Oh man, it just had to be layered on so thick. And what are the brothers going to do? Are they going to argue? I mean, it's puts them in a terrible position unless Joseph continues to show honor and grace and humility, which we'll see that Joseph does. But those sort of choices from Joseph is what makes me confident that he stayed connected to heaven, regardless of the way that his father treated him. he understood the goodness of God, even in all the evil that was meant for him. He understood and loved, showed love and appreciation. So all of that is going on, and it's complicated because it's not just a couple people. It's multiple brothers, half brothers, servant brothers, whatever, all of their families and their children. All of these relational dynamics come into play when you bring this up, when you go home and say, hey, Joseph is alive. It has to be, it's a phenomenal thing. And regardless of what next week's episode is, as we go, as a family arrives and we talk through all that again, I don't think you can spend too much time thinking about it. And I don't think you can be wrong. I don't. There's just so many dynamics to work through. So I hope you had a good time with today's episode. And I hope you have a continued good time just working through it in your own mind, because there is a lot of opportunity for sanctified imaginations. Have yourself a good day, everyone.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to this podcast on any platform you use. You can also reach out to Bob for questions or booking at thebobswitzer.com or email him at thebobswitzer@gmail.com. See you next week, guys.